Good morning, welcome. Thank you for joining today's AWRI webinar. My name is Jeff Cowie and I'm a Senior Analyst at the AWRI. In the spirit of reconciliation, the AWRI acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, the sea and the community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples today. Also would like to acknowledge Wine Australia for providing funding and support for the webinar program via the AWRI Extension Communication Project. So in this session today, we will hear from Dr. Wes Pearson, a research scientist at the AWRI, and Dr. Jean Macintyre, project manager for wine innovation at Pernod Ricard Winemakers. The title of the talk today is No and Low Alcohol Wines, Insights and Updates. So Wes will cover a range of aspects of no and low alcohol wines, including production techniques, consumer insights and future research opportunities. And then we'll go into a Q&A session both Wes and Jean. But before we make a start, a couple of quick reminders to anyone who's new to the AWRI webinar program. If you would like to pose or ask a question, you can do this at any time throughout the webinar. Just click on the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of the screen, type in your question, click send, and that will send it through. A reminder also that this session is being recorded and you'll be emailed a link at the end to the recording on the AWRI's YouTube channel. A few people have just joined, so anyone that just has, again, welcome. Today's webinar topic is No and Low Alcohol Wines, Insights and Updates. So it's a great pleasure to welcome both Wes and Jean. So some background about Wes. He has a degree in wine biochemistry from the University of British Columbia, Canada, a diploma in applied sensory and consumer science from UC Davis, and a PhD from Charles Sturt University. So Wes works in the sensory group since 2010. He's completed hundreds of sensory studies, authored over 25 papers in that time. He's an alumni of the Len Evans tutorial, wine judge, graduate of Wine Australia's Future Leaders program. He also is an accomplished winemaker with having made wine both in Canada and Bordeaux, but also here in Australia with his own juxtaposed label in McLaren Vale, South Australia. So Jean is a project manager, wine innovation at Pernod Ricard Winemakers. She leads new product development of wine products and the company's R&D program. Within her current role, she's worked on developing ready-to-drink beverages for a range of spirit brands. So prior to joining Pernod Ricard Winemakers, Jean was also a project officer here at the AWRI on a range of commercial projects with a focus on oxygen in wine. Jean has a PhD from the University of Adelaide, where her research focused on innovation methods for heat stabilization of white wine. So there are our speakers today. So Wes, if you're ready to make a start, I'll hand over to you first for the presentation, and then we'll come back to the Q&A.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We'll have a little chat about no and low alcohol wines and some of the work and investigation that we've done into this category over the past couple of years. Just share my screen. There we go. All right, so the first thing that I like to do whenever we're talking about a topic like this is, sorry, I'm just trying to get some of this sorted out here. Okay. Thank you. All right, sorry for that, guys. The first thing I like to do is to kind of set the scene for what exactly it is that we're talking about when we talk about no and low alcohol wines. So what does this constitute? Well, it's not always the same thing in different places. So in Australia, if your product is fermented with grapes and is 4.5% alcohol volume or greater, we call that wine. If it's 1.15% to 0.5%, then we call that low alcohol wine, and less than 0.5, we call that alcohol-free, non-alcoholic, or de-alcoholized. In the US market, 14 to 7% alcohol, we call that wine or table wine or light wine. Less than 8.5, we call that low alcohol wine, and less than 0.5, similar to here, alcohol-free, non-alcoholic, or de-alcoholized. In the UK, greater than 8% is wine, less than 1.2 is low alcohol wine, sorry. Less than 0.5 is de-alcoholized, and less than 0.05 is alcohol-free. And you cannot use non-alcoholic on a label. So what that means is if you had a wine in Australia that was 6% alcohol, you would call it wine in Australia. You call it low alcohol wine in the US. And I don't know what you would call it in the UK, but you wouldn't call it wine. So that's a grape-based product, something like that. Anyways, so that kind of highlights a bit of the variability in the regulation of these products and how we label them. It's not always clear. A few sector numbers on where this category has been. The most recent numbers that we've seen, according to the International Wine and Spirit Register, is that sales in 2020 were 1.1 billion US dollars, over just over 9 million cases, split between no and low, 1/3 of the market being no alcohol and the other 2/3 being low alcohol. We've seen growth of 25% by volume and 31% by value in the 5 years between 2015 and 2020. And in Australia, it was a bit lower, but there's an interesting split there, is that we see globally the sales in low alcohol is the strongest, but in Australia, we see no alcohol being the strongest. And so perhaps there's a couple of reasons why that's the case. Certainly in the US, where the low alcohol market is very strong, of course, that also includes 8.5% alcohol wines and lower, where here lower alcohol is much smaller from a alcohol percentage-wise, only 1.15 to 0.5. So that's why it occupies less of that volume. But that health and wellness movement that we're seeing, certainly that's very strong in the US, is driving a lot of that low alcohol growth and value. So who are the consumers that are choosing these products? Well, there's just to do kind of a bit of background on what's happening with a lot of consumers globally. 1 in 3 consumers are reducing their alcohol intake or are moderating. And with millennials, that number jumps to 2 out of 3. Half of all consumers are looking to improve their health with the products that they're looking for. And that's up significantly over the past 3 years. Of the people that are purchasing these products, 75% of them are under 45. So that's gives us some interesting information on who's buying these products. Also evaluating the youngest category of people who are able to drink alcohol. The number of abstainers has doubled in the past 20 years in that youngest category. And this is an interesting one. And it leads to some of the stuff we'll talk about later. That largest demographic of people who are drinking no and low alcohol wines also drink alcohol. So that's kind of relates back to that moderators line that I was talking about earlier. So those 2 strong consumer segments driving the growth in no and low is the millennials, and we have our under 50s who drink alcohol. So millennials, they're not consuming alcohol the way that their parents did. They're choosing it less often. They have, social media cultures, cameras always watching them. So they're conscious of being in control. More often, they're more adventurous in their drinking. So they're not looking outside the alcohol categories, looking for interesting and tasty different kinds of beverages. And they also they value quality in the products that they buy. A friend of mine who is he's a winemaker, but he also has a venue, hospitality venue. And he described millennials to me this way. He said, when I was a kid, I would have, or not kid, when I was younger, I would have $40 and I would find a pub that had $2 schooners and I'd buy 20 of them and go sit down. Millennials now, they come into the venue and they'll take that $40 and they'll buy 2 cocktails, alcoholic or non-alcoholic, but they just care that they're good. And so the way that they're choosing their products, certainly their alcoholic products, is much different than generations previously. The other category that we have is under 50s who drink alcohol. This is a category that perhaps is more relevant to myself. This category is looking for healthy alternatives, all right? But they're not willing to compromise on their taste or their habits. They're looking for a replacement product. And so when we talk about this category, I like to give the reference of the Rebel Whopper at Hungry Jack's, which has been a very successful product over the past couple of years that it's been available. And how this is relevant is that Hungry Jack's are not targeting vegetarians. They're not trying to bring vegetarians into their store. They're targeting meat eaters who want to make a healthy choice. And so they've created a product that gives them that healthy choice, but still doesn't compromise the flavor, smell, taste, the look of that product that they're generally a consumer of. And so that's something that they've done very well. They've made a replacement product. And I think that's what these under 50s who alcohol consumers, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that replacement product that they can have on Tuesday night and make a healthy choice to not drink alcohol, but it still gives them all of the pleasure and the quality that they would expect from a wine or a regular traditional wine. All right, so we'll shift gears a little bit. Some techniques for removing alcohol from wine. There's a few out there. Vacuum distillation, so spinning cone columns, pack columns. This is kind of what we see for most of the no alcohol production done in the country. We've got membrane separation, we've got evaporation, traditional distillation, freeze concentration, evaporation and extraction with organic or critical solvents, such as, say, liquid nitrogen, resin absorption. All of these are ways that you can remove alcohol from a matrix, and in this case, wine. I think the top 3 are what we actually see in industry. The bottom 4, distillation, obviously, is not something that works. You can do it with wine, but you don't get a product at the end of the day that is of similar sort of quality that we see in the top 3. And the bottom 3 haven't seen the scale, have the scalability in commercial venues. So generally, we see the top 3 get used in industry in Australia. The most popular, certainly over the past few years, the most popular has been the spinning cone column. This is technology that was developed in Australia by CSIRO in the 60s. Originally, it was for removing sulfur from juice, was how it was developed. The idea was that you can crush grapes, store them as juice, store them cold, all sulfured up. When you were ready for it to ferment, or the market was ready for it, or whatever, you would pass it through the spinning cone, remove all the sulfur, and then you could ferment the product. For probably obvious reasons, this didn't take off very well, but they did figure out that the spinning cone was excellent at removing alcohol. And since then, they've worked on developing this process as an alcohol removal system, among other things. It does get used in other industries, but it is quite effective at removing alcohol. And so the biggest thing with this, of course, is the vacuum that the machine gets held under that allows the alcohol to be removed at a lower temperature, so in between 35 and 40 degrees, which of course is much gentler on the wine from traditional distillation and leaves us with a much better product. These are relatively expensive machines and require a fair bit of capital cost to invest, but there are processing options available for contract processing. A newer option that's available is the Memlo system that's being offered by VA Filtration in the Barossa Valley. So this is a packed column vacuum filtration. The premise is very similar, but it's just a different way to go about it. It's a reasonably efficient machine, 1,000 liters an hour. It runs through 3 columns. You get your dealcoholized wine, we get our aroma strip, and then we get a rectification or rectified alcohol strip at the end of that as well. So both of these options kind of work on the same premise with a strong vacuum, operate at a similar temperature, and are seeing, you know, very similar results to in their finished products. So post-alcohol removal, one of the issues that we have with these products is stability. There just isn't a lot of stability. And so when we talk about stability, I don't just mean microbial. Of course, that is an issue. You know, we often take for granted as winemakers how powerful an antimicrobial agent alcohol is. When you take it out, certainly people that have had experience working with products, they understand how volatile these products can be without that alcohol in there. So maintaining that microbial stability is very important, these products post-processing. But there's also aroma and flavor stability. And so that would be something we would consider post-bottling as these products go to market, maintaining freshness and flavor and aroma over a longer period of time. And there's not a lot of work that's been done in this space, but as most of the infrastructure in our industry is set up, a supply chain is set up to handle normal wine, maintaining that or being able to extend that so that these products can, you know, kind of live lives similar to the rest of our traditional wine products would be a big deal. So this is something that we need to be aware of, and it's probably somewhere where we'll see future work done. There's also the element of pathogenic stability, and it's something that we haven't really seen and there hasn't been a problem with yet, but it's something that does need to be on our radar, as once you remove the alcohol, this is technically a food product. And so the potential for not only spoilage, but pathogenic organisms that could survive in these products is great. And so it's just something that you have to be aware of as we begin to make more of these and you know, and learn more about them. Traditionally, we see pretty standard winemaking antimicrobial and antioxidant approaches being followed: DMDC or Velcorin treatment, sulfur, ascorbic acid. These kinds of things they're getting used, but this is probably a space where we may see this expand in the future. So, just looking at composition for some of these products, some of the work that we did last year, pretty broad spectrum, looking at all the products available that are in the marketplace and then evaluating the different chemical compounds and how they exist in them post-processing. So fermentation products, you know, mostly esters. Of the 24 that we looked at, almost none of them were anywhere near their aroma threshold. They were all gone, with 2-phenylethanol being an exception. It seems to hang around just fine, which is nice floral aroma. That's a help for sure. Noisopyrenoids, beta-ionone, beta-damascenone, more compounds that are responsible for fruity characters, all below their aroma thresholds post-processing. A few monoterpenes remain. Generally, they were all quite low. These, again, citrus, floral, these kinds of compounds. Some of them would remain. So potential for using varieties that are high in monoterpenes might be good potential. Thiol, Sauvignon Blanc thiol compounds, 4-MMP, 3-MH, 3-MHA, compounds like this, they did remain post-processing. They were lower in concentration, but they were there. And again, if we look at the products in the market, Sauvignon Blanc seems to be one that works well for these in this product category. The ones that the products that are there resemble a traditional Sauvignon Blanc to a certain extent. And this is perhaps why those thiol compounds, those Sauvignon Blanc markers, they stick around. DMS and methane thiol are stable. This is maybe not necessarily a good thing. DMS in lower concentrations can be nice, but as these compounds get higher, and especially if you take everything else away, these aren't always going to add nice things to your wine, and unfortunately they stick around. Another issue is this hexylacetate hexanoic acid things. So I use this compound as just as an example, but it would happen through many of the esters of the fermentation products. Hexylacetate, of course, is the ethyl ester of hexanoic acid. Hexylacetate is nice and fruity, has a lovely aroma. Hexanoic acid smells like sweaty sports socks. What happens is that we're losing the hexylacetate portion of, in the wines that are evaporating through processing, and the hexanoic acid portion is staying, leaving us with that sweaty sock. And so, of course, if this happens over multiple organic acids through the matrix of the wine, we're gonna you may see these kind of sweaty compounds show up in the finished product, and this is something else that we have to take into account when we're making these wines. TAs varying from 2.4 to 9.2. 2.4 is pretty low, but again, we are concentrating the wine by removing 14 or 15% at least of these of these wines as they're processed. So we would expect the TAs to go up slightly. Often they'll be adjusted post-processing, but it just goes to show there's quite a variability within the products that are available on the market. So our challenges for this category, where we go, what are the pain points? Well, I think replacing the sensory effect of alcohol is a really big deal here. This is, if we want to make a replacement product for people that traditionally drink wine, they expect to have that mouthfeel, that effect of ethanol on the palate. And so being able to replace that would take a long way to being able to make that effective replacement product. Stability, I mentioned it earlier, both microbial and taste and flavor and aroma stability, understanding that and how that comes together, and what are the ramifications for the different things that we do in the winemaking process as that moves down the road. Product optimization. So right away, we would think using the machines, the dealcoholization machines, but also from a vineyard perspective or from a winemaking perspective, how can we make these wines that are better suited to go through the processing that end up as better products? Understanding that will be important. This is an expensive category to play in. And so part of that is going to be innovation. That's, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So smaller producers who don't necessarily have the money to be able to invest in this processing, in being innovative and coming up with new techniques to create no and low alcohol wines, is something that will evolve over time. Understanding the markets, what do consumers want? What are they? What is acceptable and what is not acceptable? What does packaging need to look like? Does this market mean the same thing as export markets? Understanding all of those things, none of this work has been done, so that's something that is definitely going to need to be investigated as we move forward with no-low wines. And breaking those customer aversion issues, right? Understanding that for a long time, this category was reasonably stagnant and the products that existed in them were not great. So people are trying them like, I don't want to try that again. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to leave the wine category and drink beer or spirits or different no-low categories. Keeping those consumers in the wine category by making products that meet their expectations and break those customer aversion issues is going to be really important for us as an industry. And clearing up some of this regulatory framework. So either making a clear playing field or being able to translate or communicate to producers what is needed, what are the regulations, how do I need to label my products, what are the implications for export, all those kinds of things will need to be worked out and be much clearer. We don't want those to be a barrier for producers to be able to operate in this space. So for the future, we've just this past year, we received a grant from Primary Industry South Australia, and we are using that to get some equipment to be able to make some of these products. And so that is going to go a long way for us to be able to investigate some of these questions and help develop some solutions to some of the questions that we have, some of the researchable questions that we have that we've just talked about, that can go a long way to aid producers as they go on and through their new product development journey or working with no and low products that they already have. and should allow us to hopefully crack that nut of the removing the sensory effects of that ethanol and removing those from those wine products to make them look more like traditional wines. Thank you everyone for your attention. I certainly like to thank all the people that have collaborated with me at the AWRI, but also all the people in industry who I've reached out with over the past year and had conversations with about this topic. It's been very insightful, and I certainly appreciate your candor and your feedback to me so that we can best tackle this problem and give you some outcomes that can tick the boxes for you. So thank you very much.
So thanks, Wes. And we've got both Wes and Jean on screen for the Q&A session. So just, I suppose, another recap reminder for people wanting to ask questions, use the Q&A toolbar at the bottom of the screen, type some questions in. We've got a couple already, so that will give you some time if you would like to put them in now. So a couple of questions from Paul Smart. He got in very quick right in the first minute. Some of them may have been addressed, I think, in the first couple of slides, Wes, but we'll see how we go. So one of the questions was more not a conceptual question, but probably more, it could even be regulatory. Do you have to ferment grapes, make wine, and then remove the alcohol to call it a no alcohol or a low alcohol wine? If these questions as well, if we can't answer them, some of them potentially might be regulatory, in which case we could always touch base with the regulatory team at Wine Australia, but they'll be looking at these questions as well. And then I suppose the second part to that question was, for other products which you've mentioned that are no or low, such as beer and spirits, do they still have to be made the same way? Do you have to make an alcoholic beer and then remove the alcohol? I'm not sure if either of you want to tackle that one.
I can start with that, Jeff. I'll put a disclaimer on that I'm not a regulatory expert, but my understanding of reading the regulations around that is that to call something a wine, you would need to ferment it up to that 4.5% alcohol at least, and then remove the alcohol to call it a de-alkalized or a non-alcoholic wine. I think if you were just going to start with something or even with a juice and try and call that a non-alcoholic wine, I don't think you could call it that. It may be able to be called something like a de-alkalized wine product. But yes, as Wes discussed, there's a lot of grey area in some of the regulations at the moment. So I know there is a lot of work going on around that at the moment through Wine Australia and I think Australian Grape and Wine as well. So watch this space. But my understanding with beer, I think most of them are making it as a full strength beer and then removing the alcohol. Spirits are a little bit different. I think they can do some distillation of different components using things like water rather than starting with ethanol completely. Hope that answers the question, Paul.
Cool, thanks, Jean. So another question from Paul was, in terms of, I suppose, the category or the space, should we just be adding wine flavour to water and calling it an alcohol wine? So I suppose it's in part, you've partly answered that already.
Yeah, I think you'd really struggle to get something that tastes like a wine, just starting with water and adding flavours. Again, Wes talked a bit about what's missing when we make a de-alkalized wine, and that influence of ethanol is quite big. So, I mean, you could try from the ground up to try and make something that's wine-like, but I've not seen anything in the market that doesn't start with the wine or even grape juice and tastes similar to what a wine tastes like.
So we've got a question from Frank. It might be directed to both of you, I'm not sure. So what's your experience regarding the concentrating effect on some of the acids that you talked about when removing the alcohol fraction? I suppose it's more a real life, what happens in real practical land.
Yeah, so the acid does get concentrated through the process, obviously removing a percentage of your alcohol. So your pH and your TA does change a lot when talking about spinning cone or Memlo, for example. We will adjust our acid post dealkalization and using pot carb, for example, to pull the acid down and work with that to get the balance right. So yes, you do definitely get a concentration of the acid through the process.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a question from Danielle. How far away from making no alcohol wine with I'm assuming it would be like a better taste and better mouthfeel, so more or less probably like a current wine now. So it's probably more a predict the future question.
It's a good question. It's a little bit of a how long is a piece of string. I mean, a lot of us are working pretty hard on that at the moment. I'm just trying to think. I think there was a non-alc wine that got submitted into a wine show not that long ago as blind, and it didn't get picked up as being non-alc. So I think there's a few around there that are getting right up there. To get something that's perfect, look, to be honest, I don't think we're ever going to get something that you can pick up and go, this is a big, robust red, with that real intensity. I think we're getting a lot closer with some of those lighter fresh styles with the whites, the rosés, the Sauv Blancs, those sort of things, and sparkling as well. I think we're getting closer, and I think we'll just keep chipping away at it.
Yeah, I think I did see some of the more recent shows this year with their own class categories in the wine show. So you're judging them all, I suppose, like with like, which is good to see that start to come through now. We have another couple of questions from Frank. So did you ever come across a no alcohol product that was tartrate or protein unstable? So really just looking at instabilities, I suppose, chemical instabilities for those types of products.
Yeah, I'll keep going, Wes, but jump in if you want to add something. We haven't had any problems with protein instability. I guess we protein stabilize all our wines before we send them away to get dealkalized. Tartrate and I think even calcium sometimes are very strange in a non-alc base. So we do sometimes need to cold stabilize, which is a bit tricky because once you've removed the alcohol, the freezing point is actually a bit warmer than we'd normally cold stabilize at. So definitely one to keep an eye on when you want to cold stabilize, because you can end up freezing your product, which is not ideal. Pass back to Jeff at this stage.
Well, so we at the Institute, we generally see products that are, they're in the marketplace, right? We're evaluating commercial products. And so our experience is we haven't really seen anything that's been, hazy or with tartrate. So most of what's out there seems to be tidy as far as instabilities are concerned.
There's another question we have from Mark, which is more about bulk transport. So what would be the tanker preparation, I suppose, for transporting these types of products?
Yeah, Wes mentioned it, these products are pretty unstable once you've removed the alcohol. So we'd just be looking for good hygiene and cleaning of our trucks between dealcoholization and bringing it back to the winery. I might just keep going with the next question there from Mark on the flexi tank export. Look, once you've got your wine back, you've got the alcohol out of it, you can adjust your sulfur and get that back up, but we will add juice to as part of our blending. And I think most of the other producers have fairly high residual sugar compared to a standard wine. So basically you've got a product that's very close to a grape juice, which is pretty much the ideal matrix for a yeast to grow in. So I'd be very hesitant to send something like that bulk. Basically, once you've dealcoholized it, you want to get it into bottle as soon as possible. You've got all sorts of issues with oxidation as well as the micro contamination issues as well.
That's probably a good lead in as well. It's, I suppose, what is the shelf life? Do we have to claim a shelf life? Due dates on the products themselves?
Yeah, it's a question that is consumers get a little bit confused by, I think, as well. And I know, I think in somewhere like the UK, they've shifted to using wording around, can still be consumed. Product is best by this date, but can still be safely consumed. So I think clarifying use by date and best before date is probably important. So a use by date is used on a product where there's a health or a safety risk with a product being consumed later than that. So something like a milk or a salami, things like that we know can go off and can harm the consumer. A best before date is more about the quality of the product. So in Australia, I'm not sure about the laws or the other regulations around the world, but in Australia in particular, if a product is maintaining its quality for at least 2 years, you don't need to put a best before date on. But if it has reached the shelf life or the quality expectation of a product within that 24 months, you should be putting a best before date on. It's a little bit of a it's sort of open to the producer's discretion to some extent for a best before date. With these kind of products, again, we talked about the micro Velcorin or DMDC dosing, for example. So ideally we'd be putting these products in and they would be safe and from a microbial food safety perspective once they're in bottle. So it's more about the quality of the product at that point.
Leisha's got an interesting question, I suppose, about the stability of Nolo products once you've actually opened the product. So you're consuming it. You've got half a bottle left, I suppose. Has anyone looked at whether a research space, I suppose, or just in real life of that?
I think we have done some work on that previously. I think we did include that in our back of label information for a while. So I think you'd be wanting to store things in a fridge and treating it a little bit like a fruit juice, for example. So once long life fruit juice. So once you open it, you want to be consuming it within a few days in the fridge. And like I said, things can ferment pretty quickly. So keeping an eye out for anything going wrong in the bottle is also sensible. But yeah, within a few days, I would be consuming.
And I suppose more so to that point, is there a look at packaging Nolo products in like single serve container sizes for that reason, so you consume it straight away versus a traditional 750 ml bottle?
Yeah, I haven't seen much in that smaller format. Wes, you've probably looked at more on the shelf than I have, though. Have you seen anything?
Yeah, there's products out there like that. I think it's there's when it comes to like packaging and consumer stuff, I think that there's, again, I spoke of those two demographics there, the people that are buying these products, and that demographic who's looking for a replacement product, they're buying these products and they're looking for all the cues that they get from a wine, right? So it's packaged like a wine. Wine looks like a wine label. Everything about it says wine, and then the product also says wine. So that consumer, unless they're a consumer of regular traditional wine and single serve packaging, are probably unlikely to be buying that. Where someone who does, kind of doesn't necessarily is looking for those same kind of cues in the products that they're buying, they'd be totally open to that single serve product. And so for something like that, I think you might see that those, those products have some traction, and there are a few out there.
So Jan has a questions on maybe the usual or best methods that you've found, either of you, I suppose, to replace mouthfeel for these products.
Yeah, look, I mentioned using juice to help with the balance previously. I think most producers are using some juice to add back a little bit of that weight and sweetness that we get from alcohol. Beyond that, it's probably a little bit of IP at that point. I mean, different consumers are doing different things, different producers are doing different things in that space. Some are staying within what's allowable in wine, so things like nanoproteins and tannins and things like that, or gums even. Some producers are using additives such as glycerol or other flavors and things like that, but that would push you into something like a wine product at that point as well. So that's very much, I guess, the big question with this category is, how do we get something to replace that alcohol intensity? So if we could solve it, we'd be done by now, I think.
Yeah, so there's a few other people with questions around additives, I suppose, and then does it open up the bag, I suppose, of all the different types of numbers that you might have on the labels of different additives. It's probably maybe more comments. Then we've got a question more about, I suppose, costs of production, about the processing cost to remove the alcohol, but then also a reduced volume of product that you've got after the processing. Could be more a question for Wes, a consumer expectation, any sort of consumer studies in that sort of space on what people are willing to pay, given that there's also less alcohol.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the first thing that you can do is you look at the products that are in the market, right? So what price points are they occupying? And really, we don't see too many. There's very few that are moving into that premium price point. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't consumer willingness to pay, right? I think, again, one of the things I mentioned in my presentation is that younger demographics, they are willing to pay for quality, and so there are examples where we are seeing that kind of quality barrier being breached. I think if you look at one product that I think, and it's not an Australian product, but a New Zealand product, the Gießen zero alcohol Sauvignon Blanc, I think is actually just a little bit more expensive than their traditional Sauvignon Blanc. But that would be the exception and not the rule. So I think that there is a barrier with quality at the moment, and I think people are producers are cautious to not overstep their bounds of what people are willing to pay. There isn't a lot of work out there. There's not a lot of published information, consumer information about this kind of stuff. And so again, this is another area here where we hope to explore more and find more about what are their expectations and what are they willing to pay. But that quality, that element of quality of these products, it definitely is a factor.
Thanks, Wes. This is an interesting question. I'm not sure if there will be an answer. We'll see. Are there any requirements on the methods or methodologies, and I'm assuming this is for testing the products, for testing those wines once they've been produced? Obviously, if it's a wine, you're testing alcohol with a range of different analyzers. Is there anything different for the no-low space?
Not specifically for that that I'm aware of. We do obviously quite a bit of testing on ours at certain points through the production, but nothing specific for no-low wines. I'm not sure, Wes, if you're aware of anything else.
Well, if you're bottling it as a no alcohol wine, don't, it needs to have, nutritional labels on it, right? So it needs to have those traditional. So I'm not sure if you're speaking about what we might do in the lab or what actually needs to be translated to the consumer. But carbohydrates, sugar, those the kind of things that you would see on a regular, any sort of food product, they need to be included on the back label.
Yeah. So Harry Kinsman's got a good question as well about, I suppose, going right back to the vineyard in terms of when you make these products, do you consider that in terms of, perhaps like maybe a cool region, potentially more aromatics, higher acidity, which would have lower alcohol potentially already, versus, from warmer climates, more inland. I suppose, have they proven to be better or worse in any case, or is that something even people are considering?
It probably ties back in a little bit with the discussion around consumer expectation about willingness to pay more for these kind of products as well. So I think a lot of the initial work has been done in more commercial level wines. We have trialed some Barossa wines previously, and we're really happy with the results there. But from a consumer perspective, it's a lot to ask for someone to pay quite a bit more money for something that doesn't have that alcohol. I'm actually looking forward to using the new little trial unit, and we can do some more work with those kind of higher end wines as well. I think there'll be a lot of value in doing more trial work with a greater range of wines from different areas. In terms of the higher acid, I think that may be tricky. We may need to pull back the acid a little bit more even, because the alcohol removal does increase that. But yeah, the higher aromatics, the more aromatics you have to begin with, the better that final product should be as well. So yeah, there's definitely lots of options. It's just trying to understand what a consumer's going to want at the end of the day.
Yeah, thanks.
I think something else you need to keep in mind too is that from a viticulture perspective, what are the elements in the grapes that you can promote, say, in the vineyard, that then once they're harvested, fermented, and put through the machine, aren't removed by the alcohol removal process. All right. So like in this, we right away we think of the volatiles, right? We think of the fermentation products, monoterpenes, norepinephrines, those kinds of things. But what are the other elements that make up the wine that aren't coming out? And so can we promote those in the vineyard and then use those grapes and make a better finished product? So those are some of the questions that we hope to answer, and there maybe is a solution there.
Very interesting. Jason Amos, hello. We've got a technical question from Jason. When we add, or we're able to add water to lower the sugar concentration of must, so how does a high water addition in the must then affect the low alcohol product after it's been processed or treated?
It's an interesting one because so adding water to must, in Australia at least, we can only bring the BOMA down to 13.5. So we're probably not going to end up with a particularly low alcohol wine at the end of that process. If we were to add more water than allowable, knowing that this would be going to a de-alkalized wine anyway, I think we'd probably end up with more of a dilution impact on a lot of the other components in the wine as well. So you'd lose some of those other components that are adding to the body and the structure of the wine. I think it's an interesting one to consider, and that there may be in sort of an optimal level that you can add water to and then end up with a good product. But I think any dilution you do will lead to a reduction in that mouthfeel and structure that you are getting from other components in the wine as well, and make it even more difficult to build that back up post de-alkalization. Yeah,
I would tend to agree. You have a finite amount of those things, and if you add water, there's still the same amount. You've just increased the or just diluted that. So from a no-low perspective, processing, they're even more perhaps dilute. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that isn't an option for new product development if you're not going to call it wine. It's a grape-based beverage, or, you know, if you're just trying to make something tasty, you know, sparkling, lower alcohol, put it in a can, it's just a beverage now. That's a totally different question, perhaps, and maybe that is something that is possible.
Yeah, so I was going straight to zero alcohol or non-alcoholic wine, and for something like a low alcohol wine, that is definitely an option. Piquet got a lot of airtime the last year or two, with more coming onto the market. So that's effectively diluting a must with water and fermenting that out. So there's definitely options, probably more in that lower alcohol space, where you still have enough alcohol there to provide some more body and structure to your wines. But for a zero or a de-alkalized wine, I think adding water will probably be more difficult in the long run.
We've got a question from Tony Love. So looking really at the consumers, I suppose, a lot of marketing speaking, I suppose, how delicious and similar the zero or low alcohol wines are, comparing them to wines, I suppose. I suppose the question relates to more, are we seeing a different set of sensory parameters or descriptions from a new demographic, if it is all that, you know, more of the younger generation that is the main market here? And if that's the case, why or should we be making these types of products, trying to make them taste like wine or traditional wine? Interesting one. Thanks,
Well,
Tony.
I guess, yeah, thanks, Tony. As I mentioned before in my presentation, there are two strong demographics that are driving, you know, innovation in this space, right? And one of them is that replacement product that is meant to look and taste and smell and have all the cues of a traditional wine. And then there's the whole, you know, then there's the whole wide open space where new product development exists, where you don't have any rules, and we're using grapes and fermentation and all kinds of other things to make a new product for a consumer that has a different set of criteria for why they might purchase something, repurchase something. What is their expectation of it? All of those things. What are they looking to get from that product? So there's no reason why that can't be the case. And I think that, as certainly for myself, as I've talked to different businesses around the country about, you know, these products and where they belong and how we should be making them and what are the problems, you know, there are lots of producers out here who feel like that's their space, where they don't have to follow the rules. They can do whatever they want, and they can create products that, you know, they've used grapes from that don't necessarily taste, smell, or look like wine, but they're still made from grapes and still have fermentation, and they tick the box for a consumer who's looking for something like that. So we're definitely going to see that going forward. I think there's lots of opportunity for it. Hopefully we can foster that a bit, and that innovation can, you know, push through in our industry.
So Tony had another question that's similar to also Kate Goodman's about, I suppose, that consumer groups, in terms of more potentially a perception that these products are being produced because of potentially excess wine in the marketplace, and or is there pushback from consumers with these products because they are highly manipulated, I suppose, in some ways, rather than, you know, traditional winemaking, hands-off, minimal intervention?
Well, it's a good point. I think if you look at where these products sit in the marketplace currently, there's not a lot of them that sit in that premium space. There's very few that have ventured into that space. And so who's the consumer that buys that product, right? Who's someone that spends between $10 and $15 on a bottle of wine? They're very different to someone that spends $25 to $35 on a bottle of wine. And their expectation of what is in that product is very different as well. And so I would think it seems so far, with the growth in the category and with the growth of the products that are available globally, that consumer who's buying those products, it doesn't seem to be a barrier for them. Now, if we shift that to the, say, you know, $20 to $40 bottle of wine that has, you know, that has region, has a GI on it, it's a, you know, it's varietal, comes from a place where everyone knows, right? The expectations of that consumer, when it says Barossa Shiraz on there is different. And so, you know, is that consumer, we haven't really played in that space yet. So it's hard to say if there's been kickback yet. You know, I would say that we need to make sure that the quality is there before we start, you know, dipping our toes in that pool. You know what I mean? Like, and so slowly we're getting there. I think, you know, and Jean would probably echo this. When I've talked to consumers, when they make these products, every time they make one, they make it better than the last one, because we're learning so much every time you go through the process. And so additively, as we get through these products are increasing in quality, and we are going to get there. But it's just not, I don't think we're there yet. We're starting to see just a little bit of those products creep up into that space, that premium category, where consumers are less forgiving, we'll say. So they expect quality when they spend that money. So we'll see how we get there. I don't think it's far off.
Yeah, there's a question I hadn't thought of before, which in terms of ageability of not like in terms of shelf life, like the previous or used by date by the previous question, but I suppose people wanting to, like, would you ever, with the base wine, age the wine for, you know, more aged flavors rather than just fresh primary fruit flavors like the Sauv Blancs that you mentioned, Wes? Would you ever is that even a thing we're in this sort of space? Do you want those aged wine flavors in a de-alkalized or no low type product?
It's an interesting question. We haven't played around with any sort of aged reds or whites with our de-alkalization blends. It's an interesting one to consider though. Like I said, I think the best success we've had with these products is the lighter, fresher styles and varieties. So they're not going to be traditionally aged very long anyway. Possibly something like, you know, with some of the reds, there may be some value in aging the wines a little bit ahead of de-alkalization. I'm not quite sure what de-alkalization would do to some of those characters. But yeah, definitely an interesting one to consider.
Never thought about that for a second. That'd be very interesting. Hasn't been done.
Yeah, I was thinking aged Rieslings or Semillons, but getting into some premium products there to process and remove some alcohol and volume. Interesting question. That's why we're here today. And then another more technical question about rather than removing alcohol, I suppose, from a finished product, about removing sugar from aged goods before, and not necessarily by adding water, but technologies, I suppose, to remove sugar or yeast technology, preventing yeast from converting the sugar to alcohol, probably making more glycerol or something else. Who wants to tackle that one?
I could start. Yeah, look, it's definitely something that would be advantageous if we could get the sugar out of juice. There's not many ways to do that particularly easily at the moment, though. There are some companies who suggest they may be able to do it quite well, but we haven't seen them up and running yet. In terms of yeast converting the sugar to something else, Jeff mentioned glycerol, but effectively there's 200 or 250 grams of sugar per litre in grape juice, and that's got to go somewhere. So if the yeast aren't going to turn it to ethanol, they're going to convert it to something like glycerol or other acids, potentially other things we don't necessarily want in our wine. So it's a matter of trying to figure out where to convert that sugar to if you're not going to turn it into alcohol. The other thing with yeast as well is that they convert a whole lot of other components of grapes into delicious smelling and tasting things. So having them actually conduct the fermentation is really valuable to produce a starting point before going to de-alkalization. I imagine everyone would have tasted grape juice and they would have tasted de-alkalized wine and understand they're quite different things. So the fermentation process does a lot other than, or in addition to the alcohol production as well. Don't know if Wes wants to add to that as well.
No, that's exactly it. We've been engineering grapevines to produce as much sugar as possible for 200 years, and now we want to undo that. I don't think so. I think we're stuck with what we got. It's that getting rid of that sugar. There's just so much of it, right? Like, and techniques like nanofiltration, reverse osmosis, they can remove smaller amounts of sugar, but there's just so much of it, and it's a difficult medium to work with. For the time being, the fermenting into ethanol and then removing the ethanol is the most practical application, it seems. That doesn't mean that there aren't other answers out there for approaches, and certainly in the low alcohol space or lower alcohol space, there's lots of potential for things like that. And again, innovation is going to be key here to try to figure out some of these things. But yeah, for the time being, we can't use GMOs. And even if we could, where's all the, what is it going to convert it into? We can't turn it into carbon dioxide. Can't turn it into glycerol, completely. We can, use some of those as tools, but yeah, there's a lot of sugar there. So there's not other options at this point.
So we've got one more question, but just a reminder to anyone else that is keen on hearing or asking a question to our panelists today, just type in your question now. The last question I've got is someone that just wants to qualify. They're not from the viticultural winemaking background, but they're just thinking about other types of products and thinking about, can wines be dehydrated with a hot or cold dehydrator, similar to how instant coffee is made to make a wine syrup?
Look, I think as soon as you start trying to dehydrate wine any further, you will lose a lot of the other components as well. So I guess we've started using things like spinning cone and the Memlo types of technology where we've got a low temperature but a low pressure evaporation process effectively. We're using that to pull all that ethanol out. I guess if you kept running it, you might be able to pull more water out, but you'd be pulling out a lot of the other aromatics as well that would come off, and those volatile components, they'd come off with that water as well. Probably depends really what you're trying to achieve with it. You could probably achieve something, a more concentrated product, but it would probably be more concentrated in all those non-volatile components that end up being very acidic. Yeah.
Well, as far as I know, they actually use a spinning cone column to create freeze-dried coffee or dehydrated coffee. So certainly you could, but just because you could doesn't mean you should. As Jean pointed out, it's yeah, all those flavors that make wine, they would be likely gone.
Andrew Cherry's put through a question, long one. Let's see if I can describe it to you. To counteract, I suppose, the watery taste potentially after you've removed the alcohol, you can add sugar to wine. That makes it more sweet, but then it can also lack structure, so it's not ideal. I think I was supposed to quote someone in that. Sorry, Andrew. But his comment about there's a 0% sparkling rosé is made very differently. Start with premium grapes that are fermented with good bacteria rather than yeast. And utilizing this process, not adding yeast, means that alcohol is not created in the first place as the grapes are fermenting. To add the flavor and structure of the wine, they also infuse the wine with selected teas. So I'm not sure if that's more a question or just a...
I think this is the Kylie Minogue wine that's just been launched. I did hear about this. I was chatting to someone about this yesterday. I have heard of some bacteria that can ferment, and it is a non-alcoholic ferment. I haven't seen any that consume all that sugar. As I mentioned, there's 20% sugar in the grape juice. So I'm not quite sure what they'd be converting that sugar to. Like I said, if it's not going to ethanol, I'm not quite sure what else it would would turn up as. So yeah, look, I haven't read much more about this, but I'd be curious to find out a little bit more about this as well. So if anyone else knows any more, feel free to drop something in the comments on what they're doing there.
Yeah, Leandro was talking about that bacteria can consume sugar, but yeah, maybe we'll take that one offline. Andrew, if you want to send an email just to the help desk, and we can patch it through both to Wes and Jean for further commentary, or if you've got something to share as well. And that goes to anyone as well. If there's any questions that you think of in the next hour after you're contemplating this presentation today, patch them through, and we'll answer them then offline as well. So lots of questions coming through still. So Jim Nielsen's got a question. Is it possible to collect the desirable products that have been extracted during the alcohol removal and using that separately to add back to that product, or to create maybe another product?
Yeah. So with spinning cone, most of that aroma comes off in the first sort of 1% of the distillation, I guess. And that's a really aromatic fraction. And that mostly, or about half of that, would get back added to the dealcoholized wine. Still trying to keep the alcohol below that 0.5% to keep it as a non-alcoholic wine. So we do capture most of that, but there is more aroma that does get lost at the moment in that process. Memlo have told me that they have a process to extract the ethanol out of that stream, that sort of first aroma stream, and that they can add all the aroma back into their dealcoholized wines, but haven't given a whole lot more information beyond that. So yeah, definitely, it's definitely a valuable stream that comes out of the process, not a waste stream, and that aroma fraction is really valuable to try and add back in and help build structure and character back to the dealcoholized wine as well. So it's not getting just thrown down the sink at the moment.
If it would be a game changer if you could, if you could capture all of that and be able to add it all back, right? Because the volatiles, they come off with the ethanol. So all that volatile fraction is still dissolved in ethanol. You got to get rid of the ethanol somehow. So that next step of removing the volatiles from the ethanol, because of course, if it's okay, if you're at 0.5%, you can add some of it back. You have a bit of room to play with, because it comes off the machine at 0. So you can add a bit back to get more flavor. But especially if you're trying to have a product that's at 0.05, you're very limited in what you can add back. So you have to remove it from that alcohol matrix to be able to add it back. So that would be a big step forward if that process could be tweaked and more efficient.
Okay, so I think that's the last of the questions that people have sent through. Wes or Jean, did you have any closing remarks at all that you'd like to share?
Nothing from me. I think we've covered a really wide range of technical and consumer and sensory within this space. So
no, it's been great.
Thank you.
Thought there would be some good questions, and there certainly has been.
Yeah.
There's lots of interest, and it's great. Look, if you have more questions or comments, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. This is an evolving space, and so I think that collectively we all need to pull on the rope in the same direction. Try to get, like I said, crack this nut. See if we can get these products over the line.
Okay, thanks both to Wes and Jean for today. Also like to thank the audience and for all those people that have patched through your questions today. So some really interesting insights about what you're all thinking about as well. So a reminder, you'll be sent through a link to a recording of this presentation after we exit now, and that will be on AWR's YouTube channel. So the next AWR webinar will be next week. That's on the 10th of November. So we'll hear from a panel of experts in that one around a quite broad topic of bioprotection in winemaking. So if you haven't already, and if you'd like to register for this session, please visit the AWR website and register. Thanks everyone for today. Again, thanks Wes and Jean, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time at the next webinar.